Dear friends, welcome to a new appointment with Let Food Be Your Medicine. We all know that at the basis of our health there has to be proper nutrition, but above all also information, a real, let's say, nutrition education. And so there is a need for many people to be informed in the right way. Poor nutrition causes more and more diseases every year that are sometimes very serious. Today we talk about this with two guests. We have Dr. Christian Orlando, a molecular biologist who is an expert in sports nutrition and supplementation. And we have the journalist, writer, science popularizer that we know well, Adriano Panzironi. So, welcome. Immediately I wanted to comment again on this, which is the title then of our show, Make Food Be Your Medicine. This was said more than 2,400 years ago by a certain Hippocrates. Mr. Panzironi, you should know this Hippocrates well.
Everything has a beginning. And so if somehow this medicine has lost its way, you have to start from where the road started. Otherwise, you cannot understand how it was lost. The Greek world, as I said, in 200 years invented basically everything from mathematics to philosophy to medicine to architecture, because it was a concept of life that was according to nature. That is, for the Greek world, there was nature within which man existed. We, with the Judeo-Christian mentality, did exactly the opposite. We put man at the center of everything, and therefore nature at the disposal of man. This seems little, but it is a big difference, because when you have such a presumption, this involves the fact that, of course, people, and therefore also scientists, consider themselves more informed, more able to change nature and not abide by its rules. So even medically, we went from a medicine of observation, from a medicine that had to understand how the human body worked as it was part of nature, to a medicine instead that had the presumption to say, okay, if that thing doesn't work, I'll find the contrived artificial way to put it right. Here is this presumption that comes from this Judeo-Christian mentality. It leads today to the fact that this medicine is no longer a medicine of observation, but a dogmatic medicine. It becomes a religion, and then it becomes basically like all sciences that are not naturalistic, are wrong and presumptuous ways that lead then, and that information does not for that reason have to be a truth, but it simply becomes the truth according to who brings this truth. So a journalist who, talking about information, points out contradictory elements of this medicine is criticized. On the other hand, a professor who is considered up to the level of the medical class and therefore the dogmatic medical class, that one might say wrong things as well, but just because a professor says them, they must be considered right. And this inability of science to modify itself and therefore to accept always new information, accept always new different points of view, has led to the disaster of modern medicine.
So we said there is a need to do information on proper nutrition. How much of it is done? Is enough being done? But more importantly, who is supposed to be doing it?
Certainly, unfortunately, too little is being done, or rather too much is being done of a diet that we will see is incorrect, of a diet that is the basis now of all modern diseases. As we were saying before, if medicine had carried out the input of Hippocrates, we certainly would not be at these levels today. So a diet, unfortunately, that is carried on by the food industries, so by business, by money, and that has been precisely since the 1950s induced towards a diet rich in sugar and carbohydrates, to the detriment of a diet instead of fats, where fat has been demonized and carbohydrate and sugar exalted, which, as we know, is the opposite. This should be carried from the very beginning within families, because then the child grows up to be an adult, and so he himself carries on proper nutrition and passes it on to his children as well. I see this with my own, the moment I do proper nutrition, so with eggs in the morning, some bacon, etc., they themselves imitate me. And so I know that as adults they will continue in that and carry on that lifestyle, but why will it lead to their well-being? I can also see it, now we are in flu season. Fortunately, my children are quite well between nutrition and also good supplementation, because it's not that young children don't have to do it. They also need proper supplementation, and when the classes are decimated, my children fortunately are quite well. So this is clear evidence that nutrition, and again, proper and even good supplementation makes sure that our bodies have all the elements available to stay fit.
The first topic we're going to address today is headaches. And we found this video, we created this video just to explain it. Let's watch it together.
Headaches, in their countless expressions, occasionally affect 5 out of 7 people, while 3 to 5% of the population suffers from chronic migraines. There are also less common forms of headache, such as cluster headache, which involves only 0.1% of the population, but its severity has also made it renamed as the suicide headache. Overall, the condition of migraine headaches costs a record 27 billion euros a year in public spending in Europe alone. Pharmacological treatments are essentially symptomatic and risk chronicity of the condition. In Italy, about 3 million people suffer from chronic migraine, with a loss of 12 million working days and a social cost of 6 billion euros a year. It is also estimated that 4 million doctor visits are made each year in Italy just because of migraines.
We have seen some striking numbers, but before we proceed with the analysis of these numbers, I wanted to ask Dr. Orlando if he could quickly tell us what headaches are.
Sure. So let's say that headaches are basically divided into 2 types. We have primary type headaches and secondary type headaches. The most common headaches are the primary type headaches, and mainly we have migraines, tension type headaches, and precisely cluster headaches. We can say that 90% of headaches are actually tension type headaches and migraines. Tension type headaches are essentially due to an imbalance in the synthesis of certain neurotransmitters that are induced precisely by an improper diet, loaded therefore with insulin carbohydrates. As we have seen that as a result of a diet loaded with insulin carbohydrates, insulin is stimulated, which in turn induces neurons to synthesize serotonin. In turn, as opposed to insulin, we have the synthesis of precisely cortisol, which in turn induces by neurons the synthesis instead of adrenaline and not adrenaline. So the neurons are no longer able to say choose which neurotransmitter to reproduce, but are induced by an unbalanced diet. So this causes inflammation and causes an increase in precisely pain perception, as well as also as a result of cortisol stress synthesis with pain also often in the neck muscles. And therefore, to carry on, what is a cervical? On the other hand, as far as migraine is concerned, migraine essentially is due instead to the synthesis of histamine, which precisely has a receptor that induces vasodilation of the blood vessels precisely, which allows the crossing of the blood-brain barrier by the cells of the immune system, which then release inflammatory cytokines and, let's say, acidic waste within the neurons themselves. Furthermore, we have seen how we know that a diet rich in insulin-rich carbohydrates creates gut dysbiosis and inactivation of an enzyme, which is the tau enzyme, which would serve to inactivate precisely the histamine, and then in turn the histamine keeps going, and the cortisol that is expressed as a result of this type of feeding also kills Th1 lymphocytes, leading to an excessive also proliferation deli Th2 lymphocytes with precisely an immune system that goes even more haywire and even more histamine synthesis. The last important thing is that neurons also have a special carrier called GLUT3, which allows the entry of glucose inside the neurons with therefore synthesis of free radicals. In addition, we also have excessive ATP as a result of overproduction of energy with accumulation of acidic waste. These not being able to cross the blood-brain barrier at the exit remain inside the neurons, thus creating further inflammation, which then in the long run also leads to other neurodegenerative diseases that can be Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc. Also, because what medicine does precisely, as I said just now, Adriano, modern medicine is to give drugs that go to decrease essentially the sensation of pain, then do not go to act at the base of inflammation exactly on the symptom, and continues to progress inflammation, giving in short, then precisely originate even more serious diseases.
They act on the symptom, therefore. So to confirm what our Dr. Orlando was saying, we have a little video, because in the end it seems to me that it all depends on the diet, but especially on these insulin carbohydrates, that is, these sugars. Let's go and see why. Let's look at this video.
Vasodilation of the cerebral circulatory system is induced by excessive cortisol production, which reduces serotonin production and increases blood pressure by activating nitric oxide production. Excessive cortisol production depends on sugar-rich diet in response to glycemic declines and induced inflammation. Vasodilation is also induced by the excessive production of acid waste caused by excess sugar in neurons. Another actor in vessel dilation is the neuropeptide CGRP produced by trigeminal nerve neurons, stimulated by interleukin-1 beta, which is also produced by mast cells during the phenomenon of gut dysbiosis induced by sugar-rich foods. Finally, vasodilation is also induced by the biogenic amine histamine produced by the Th2 immune system, imbalanced by sugar-rich food.
Mr. Panzironi, as we say here in Rome, round and round, it all depends on these blessed, cursed, let's call them insulin-rich carbohydrates.
I would say more cursed, but the concept is obviously that we always have to imagine pathologies and even localized pathologies as an expression induced by an overall metabolic alteration of our body. This is here the main mistake that dogmatic medicine commits, because the more we go on, the more we have doctors who specialize in solving, let's say, so specific pathologies. However, these doctors, the more they specialize, the more they lose awareness of the holistic system of our body. We should not think that our immune system assists all of our metabolism. So what happens, for example, in the gut with the production of inflammatory cytokines, then these cytokines get into the bloodstream, get carried to all the districts of our body, let's say the matrices and so on. And this leads to a common immune system response. So we can't imagine that there is a Th1 type imbalance in the gut, and then on the hands or in the brain we have Th2, because obviously these cytokines then go to specialize an immune response, which then are why we eat some carbohydrates and our head hurts or our knee hurts, which instead, obviously, according to medicine, is not correlated. So if you have a knee problem, you go to the orthopedist. If you have a head problem, you go to the center, obviously, of migraines. And then in the end, you don't solve the problem, because what today's medicine does is to stop, as Orlando said, basically to turn off these alarm bells that are sort of the sirens of a house on fire, hoping that by turning off that siren, obviously the house will not finish burning. Instead, exactly the opposite happens. We have to leave the bell on, and that has to give us the opportunity to understand that we are obviously pursuing a wrong diet. And then by changing the diet, the normal consequence will be to bring our metabolism back into a stasis phase, in this case of the immune system. And this literally pushes the symptomatic phenomena, such as those of headaches, which is a neuronal inflammation, is a vascular inflammation, which then, by the way, as has also been mentioned before, over time it has been shown that those who suffer from migraines or headaches of various kinds then become more prone to the occurrence of degenerative brain diseases, such as obviously Alzheimer's, but also senile dementia, which is due precisely to a vascular alteration of our brain. We must always remember that as much as we have been told for years that our brains go on sugar, which is true because the only nutrient other than ketone bodies that can energize our neurons is glucose, but that does not mean that we have to flood our brains with tsunamis of sugar. Otherwise, the argument would also apply that since water is the basis of life, we can drown a person in the hope that he or she will not die.
This example is fitting. I with you, however, Mr. Panzironi, I also wanted to say quickly, let's say 2 figures that the previous video gave us that said that 3 million people suffer from chronic migraine with a loss of 12 million work days and a social cost of 6 billion euros a year. I add, because we obviously have an addition to the Istituto Superiore di Sanità, it tells us that in Italy over 7 million people suffer from headaches, which is one of the most common forms of pain in the population. I would like a comment, because you talked, of course, yes, about the medical part, but here we are also talking about the economic part.
It must be said that when a pathology is so extensive and so present, we can no longer speak of a randomness or an issue that somehow affects a few people. Instead, on the contrary, when a pathology is so present, it is clear that human beings are not made to eat certain foods. Otherwise, we would have much more sporadic cases. So the equation, you eat carbohydrates and you get headaches, applies. It is clear that with this mode, the only way to avoid this disaster is economically, but also obviously on human health. Because we must always remember that diseases are also human suffering. How many people, besides not working, it is not that they stay home on vacation. When they are at home, maybe they have to be locked up in a room and they close the shutters so they don't see the light. Because anything that interacts like that, even if it is light, if it is noise, gives a lot of discomfort to migraine sufferers. It is a life that is almost not worth living for, especially since there are some headaches that are also those of suicide. These are people who decide to kill themselves precisely so that they don't continue to suffer in this way. So clearly, it is a serious problem that cannot be addressed by symptomatic medicine, but by medicine that looks at the cause. And unfortunately, this dogmatic medicine does not look at the causes, but only looks at the effects.
Dr. Orlando, nutrition and supplementation can be important both at the preventive level and, of course, hoping that it never serves, however, at the curative level.
Well, certainly, as we said, is the basis of everything. So a proper diet ensures that we do not trigger those inflammatory processes that then lead precisely to the various diseases. So from that starts everything, because our body is what we eat essentially. So we do not eat inflammatory foods and inflammation is not created. I have several patients precisely who have suffered for years from migraine and see this pain disappear, this symptomatology within a month. They put their body back in optimal condition. So then they also start with a proper supplementation of antioxidants, of certainly vitamin C, vitamin D, in which precisely we put our immune system back on track. And we go, thanks to the antioxidants, to remove and eliminate these free radicals that accumulate inside our cells. And then this detoxification makes precisely that. We return to an overall balance, because then the body as a whole precisely cannot be seen in watertight compartments. This is the fundamental thing.
Delle nostre cellule, e quindi questa disintossicazione fa sì che appunto si ritorni in un equilibrio generale, perché poi l'organismo è un tutt'uno, appunto non può essere visto a scompartimenti stagni, questa è la cosa fondamentale.
Thank you, Dr. Orlando. I wanted to talk about headaches, obviously headaches and Life 120 lifestyle with Adriano Panzironi, because the results obtained, then we also have a book that is Living to 120, the healings, the results obtained with Life 120 lifestyle are really very important, and so many testimonials that we had both with the health seeker as well as with Life 120 stories, as well as when you did the dinners around Italy. But the results are also quantifiable, because you made this book, The Healings, which is a real scientific research, and you got some results with important numbers. Can you tell us something about that?
Before I talk about the results, I want to make a comment on this testimony, because this person had been suffering from headaches for 48 years, so he must have seen many doctors, used many medications, and this thing never resolved it. It only took 4 months to change his life. I can say that it also took a long time because, in fact, not surprisingly, the lady made a point. She said that she had not started very precisely because she was abusing with fruit. Actually, if one changes the diet and does it from the beginning very precisely, we have seen people with migraines that they had been suffering from for 30 years go away in 10 days. As soon as there was a substantial reduction in carbohydrates taken away, the inflammation, the headaches would not come back, the migraines would not come back. So it also depends very much on how one decides to approach this lifestyle. The more precisely one does it, the more its effectiveness increases, its ability to give us results in a much more optimal way. Obviously, in the book, The Healings, we remember, was an information gathering work done in 2018, where I met more than 5,000 people. We selected 1,000. They had many pathologies. And obviously, headaches was one of those pathologies on which we decided to have this focus. In fact, in this book, as far as migraine is concerned, there are 299 people who were suffering from it. Of these, then we asked both if they were taking medication, if they had improved after starting Life 120. 91% of these people stated that they were totally cured. This means that the people who were following Life 120 had no more episodes. Only in 9% they had an improvement, which is the part of those people maybe not doing Life 120 perfectly still got an improvement, which they had not been able to get with traditional medicines. Obviously, if we talk about medication, 92% are no longer using medication, obviously being healed as well. 5% have reduced medication. 3 people, on the other hand, have not changed the administration, but still got an improvement. Regarding neck pain, that instead is a tension type of headache, the 397 suffered from it. It is a type of headache that is more frequent and also very much due to stress, to cortisol, that precisely leads to this stringing of these muscles at the base of the neck. And this then leads to the emergence of the headache that starts precisely from the pain in the neck and then eventually gets to involve a part of the head or even all of it. It depends on the cases. 69% of these people got totally cured, 27% improved, and 4% had no improvement. The drugs after starting Life 120, 89%, so this is the totality, no longer use them. 5% have reduced, 6% have changed the administration. Why is there a slightly lower figure on this? Because while in migraine, the main reason is obviously the carbohydrate diet, taking those away solves the problem. In neck pain, on the other hand, there is a problem of stress as well. So it is more difficult that even taking away the foods and not perhaps supplementing the stress killer or otherwise avoiding exposure to stressors, this can lead in a larger percentage to still have a maintenance of the condition, but still in a much smaller percentage, and certainly 69% have solved it anyway.
So thank you to Mr. Panzironi.